This paper is entitled Arabs, Jews, A Balance of Power and the Benefits of Atrocity. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that in individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. Nietzsche could also have said that in situations of war, nations will commit unspeakable acts of violence and carnage, which for individual citizens in peacetime would have been unthinkable. From the beginning of the 19th century, a knowledge of this tendency was well established among the proconsuls of the British Empire. Repeatedly, the British were able to exploit this tendency as a basic element of their balance of power approach to foreign conquest. The idea of the balance of power was by stratagem and intrigue to weaken potential adversaries by turning them against one another, by fomenting distrust and discord between nations and peoples. The British sought by trade, diplomacy, and subterfuge to encourage differences by siding with the weaker party, thereby creating a balance of force between them. This emboldening of the weaker party was done by the promise of material assistance and a show of military force, although military involvement would normally prove to be temporary and limited. If such orchestrated conflict developed into all-out war, there would be acts of violence and brutality committed, including atrocities by one or both sides. The benefit of this escalation to the British was that the indelible memory created would become a permanent obstacle to any form of reconciliation, and therefore beneficial to the strategy of perpetual conflict and war. By the end of the 19th century, the British Empire had reached the greatest extensiveness of any empire in human history. Encircling the world, it controlled a quarter of the world population and a quarter of the habitable territory of the earth. But by 1900, it was preparing to make another bold move. At the time, the primary instrument of conquest was the balance of power, but the mechanism of rule included two other elements. After all, Britain, a relatively small country, did not have a large land army for conquest and control. Instead, for military purposes, it relied on its vast navy. The Royal Navy exceeded in shipage the combined forces of any other two nations combined. But the domestic stability of its many colonies ultimately depended on the imposition of its imperial law. That law was a continuation of its venerated common law tradition. However, in the quest for legal hegemony, the British faced two obstacles. One was the continental or civil law tradition, especially the increasing legal influence of German law around the world. The other was the vast realm of Islamic Sharia. In fact, Islam represented the most widespread alternative legal order in the world. In its various iterations, it nearly equaled in population and territory both the Western jurisdictions of English and continental law combined. Moreover, it was embedded in a deep religious culture with strong participation among the population generally. With the outbreak of World War I, questions of law moved to the fore of British policy. The problem of increasing German influence would be solved dramatically by the events of the World War and the aftermath of Armistice and Versailles. But the problem of Islamic law was of a different character and required a different approach. Whatever the motivations might be attached to a letter passed from Lord Balfour to Lord Rothschild in 1914, or with the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916, there is reason to view it in terms of its implication for the future of Islamic law. Already a balance of power had been established between Muslim and Hindu in India, just as a division would be established between Arab and Turk. But now, introducing a colony of Jews into the region on the basis of British authority had the potential of planting another potentially divisive animus against the hegemony of Islamic jurisprudence. The Jews, after all, were equally embedded in a long historic past, a holistic religion, and the surviving traces of their own law. When viewed from the modern perspective, the balance of power strategy, with its perpetual conflict, its tendency to war, and its incidence of atrocity, could not have been more successful or more long-lasting. Whatever the original intent, once set into place, the inertia of conflict between Arab and Jew required only occasional incitement to continue it on without a foreseeable conclusion. The two sides were made irreconcilable by the atrocities inflicted, as the British sought at various times to serve alternately as impartial mediator or partisan ally. Whatever the intended purpose, the result has been a supply of arms and a frequency of provocation to have maintained the conflict for more than 100 years.